In March 2012, the dismembered body of 27-year-old Mason Tate was found in the bathtub of his Hollywood Hills apartment. The investigation that followed uncovered a terrifying truth. His death was not an isolated crime. The LAPD soon linked his murder to a series of unsolved disappearances spanning the past 5 years. In 2008, a quiet man named Elliot Grayson had moved into a secluded home on Mulholland Drive, keeping to himself, unnoticed by his famous neighbor, actor Leo Carver. But behind the locked doors of his home, a dark obsession was growing. What seemed like a tragic case of a missing actor quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. A trail of cold, calculated murders that had gone undetected for years. The Hollywood Hills had always been a place of glamour, where towering mansions sat nestled against winding roads, hidden by palm trees and high fences. It was a place where the rich and famous lived, a neighborhood that shimmered under the California sun. But on the morning of March 6, 2012, the illusion of luxury shattered. A call came into the LAPD dispatch just after 10 a.m. A landlord had entered a rental property on Mulholland Drive, responding to complaints of an overflowing bathtub. The tenant, a young aspiring actor named Mason Tate, had missed a rent payment. His phone had gone unanswered for 2 days, and the landlord assumed he had skipped town. He had come expecting an abandoned unit, maybe a trashed living room, at worst an eviction notice to be issued. Instead, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The moment he opened the door, a strong metallic stench filled his nostrils. It wasn't the usual smell of damp clothes or food left too long in the sink. It was something far worse. His shoes slipped slightly on the bathroom floor, a thin layer of red mixing with the water that had begun seeping into the hallway carpet. When he stepped forward, his foot splashed. That was when he saw it. The bathtub was still running, the water so high that it spilled over the edges in slow, heavy drips. The steam rising from it should have fogged up the mirror, but instead, the air was thick with something darker. The body inside was barely recognizable. What was once Mason Tate was now a twisted, dissected version of the man people knew. His arms had been severed at the elbows, his legs cut at the knees, each piece placed neatly beside him, as if arranged on display. The cuts were precise, too clean to be made in panic. There were no signs of struggle in the apartment, no furniture overturned, no broken glass. Whoever had done this had been calm, methodical. The landlord stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat, hands trembling as he fumbled for his phone. The moment he managed to dial, his voice cracked, barely forming the words as he told the operator what he had found. Within minutes, the street was swarmed with flashing lights, yellow tape stretching across the front yard. Detectives from the LAPD's homicide division arrived shortly after, stepping into a crime scene so disturbing that even the most seasoned officers hesitated before entering. They moved carefully, gloved hands lifting objects, eyes scanning the walls for any sign of a struggle. But there was nothing out of place, nothing to suggest Mason had fought for his life. The apartment was almost too clean. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to kill him, they had taken their time. By the afternoon, the coroner confirmed what the detectives already suspected. The killer knew what they were doing. The cuts were made with precision, the type of precision that required knowledge. An amateur wouldn't have known how to separate the joints so perfectly. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. And worse, the way the body had been arranged suggested something chilling. This wasn't the first time. As detectives started piecing together Mason Tate's last days, they quickly learned he wasn't just another struggling actor in Los Angeles. He was well connected. He had spent nights at the biggest Hollywood parties, brushing shoulders with producers, directors, and some of the most recognizable faces in the industry. And the name that kept coming up the most was Leo Carver, the A-list movie star who lived just next door. LAPD officers reached out to Leo that evening, but his assistant informed them he was on set for a new film. He wouldn't be available until the next morning, but something about Mason's connections to Hollywood's elite made the case feel even more tangled. Was this a personal grudge, a warning, or was it something else entirely? The next step was talking to the neighbors. Residents of the Hollywood Hills were known for their privacy, their properties often separated by high hedges and private gates. But those who had lived there long enough recognized familiar faces. People knew which houses threw the loudest parties, which driveways saw the most expensive cars, and then there were the ones no one really knew. One of the first people the police spoke to was Elliot Grayson, a man whose house sat just a few yards away from Mason's apartment. His property was nothing like the others. There were no parties, no guests, just closed blinds, a high fence, and a security camera pointed toward the street. He had been living there for nearly 4 years, but most neighbors had never seen him outside for more than a few minutes at a time. His interactions were short, his presence forgettable. When detectives knocked on his door on March 8, 2012, it took longer than expected for him to answer. When he finally did, he seemed unbothered. He spoke politely, answered their questions without hesitation. He said he never really spoke to Mason, that they had no real interactions. His voice was calm, measured. The detectives noted his hands, smooth, clean, nails trimmed. No bruises, no cuts. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. But something felt off. There was a sense of detachment in the way he spoke, like he was answering questions about a news article he had read, rather than a murder that had happened just steps away. The conversation lasted no more than 10 minutes. Elliot Grayson nodded when the detectives left, closing the door behind them. But as they walked away, a thought lingered. He had been cooperative. Too cooperative. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he had said them. The investigation stretched into the next week, growing more complex by the day. As detectives sifted through Mason's phone records, bank statements, and social media, they found something troubling. There was no indication of any threat. No cryptic messages, no debts owed, no sudden conflicts. Mason had gone about his life as if he had no idea he was being watched. But the evidence was piling up. And on March 20th, 2012, the case took an unexpected turn. That week, wildfires had erupted across the Hollywood Hills. The dry season had left the landscape vulnerable, and by midday, thick plumes of smoke choked the air, spreading fast through the canyons. Firefighters rushed to control the blaze, evacuating nearby homes, including Elliot Grayson's. As the fires raged, burning through dry grass and abandoned lots, something unexpected was uncovered. In a stretch of scorched land behind Elliot's backyard, fire crews stumbled upon human remains. Charred but unmistakable, bones were half buried in the dirt. Within hours, the LAPD swarmed the site. The remains weren't fresh. The bones had been there for years, and as forensic teams worked through the night, what they uncovered changed everything. The remains matched 3 different missing persons cases, all unsolved, all from different years. Elliot Grayson, the quiet neighbor no one ever suspected, had just become their prime suspect. The case wasn't just about Mason Tate anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. By morning, March 21st, 2012, the evidence was enough to secure a search warrant for his home, and what they found inside would reveal the truth about a man who had hidden in plain sight for years. Elliot Grayson wasn't just a reclusive neighbor, he was a serial killer. The spring of 2011 arrived in Los Angeles with the scent of jasmine in the air and the usual hum of the Hollywood Hills. Fast cars on winding roads, the distant echo of music from rooftop parties, and the steady buzz of a city built on illusion. For most people who lived there, it was just another year of chasing success, of making sure they were seen at the right events, of carving their names into the bright lights of an industry that only rewarded the relentless. But for Elliot Grayson, the world outside his home barely existed. He had lived on Mulholland Drive since 2008, choosing the house for its distance from the street, the high fence that surrounded it, and the way the windows could be sealed shut with blackout curtains. The house itself was modern, though there was nothing inviting about it. The shades were always drawn, the mailbox was always empty. There were no cars parked in the driveway, no signs of life except for the faint glow of a television flickering through the blinds at night. The neighbors didn't know much about him. Those who had seen him described him in passing. Tall, thin, always dressed neatly but unremarkably, always looking like he had somewhere else to be. He spoke very little, if at all. When he did, it was with a strange formality that made people uneasy. He never smiled, never stopped for small talk. When packages arrived at his door, they were always collected within minutes, as if he had been watching, waiting. He worked as an anesthesiologist, a profession that suited him. It allowed him to be close to people without ever really connecting. He knew how to silence pain, how to slow a heartbeat, how to bring someone to the very edge of unconsciousness and then pull them back. And, more importantly, he knew what it looked like when a body gave up, when the line between life and death blurred. It wasn't rage that drove him. He had never been angry. He didn't kill for revenge or out of passion. He did it because it made him feel something he couldn't quite describe. There was a deep satisfaction in the way life could be taken apart, in the way he could control every single aspect of it. And once he started, he never stopped. By March 2011, he had already done it 3 times. The first was Chloe Dawson, a 24-year-old model who had been trying to break into the industry. She had been found in an abandoned apartment in August 2009, her body drained of blood, her arms positioned neatly at her sides. There had been no struggle, no sign of a break-in. The LAPD had dismissed it as a drug-related case, assuming she had fallen into the wrong crowd. But the precision of her wounds told a different story, one that no one had been looking for at the time. The second had been Adrian Bell, a 32-year-old personal trainer who had vanished in July 2010. He had been strong, muscular, the kind of man who could have put up a fight, but he hadn't. He had been overpowered before he even knew what was happening. His body had never been found, at least not until March 2012, when the wildfires would uncover what had been buried deep in Elliot's backyard. The third had been Julia Ramos, a 30-year-old talent agent who disappeared in March 2011. She had been powerful, well-known in the industry, the kind of woman who turned struggling actors into household names. When she vanished, the media had swarmed the case. Her burnt-out car had been found on the outskirts of LA, a single high-heeled shoe left behind in the dust. Investigators had spent months searching for answers, but there had been nothing to find. They hadn't known they were looking for a man who had spent his life perfecting invisibility. Elliot had been careful with all of them. He had been patient. He had studied them for months before taking action, learning their schedules, their habits, the little details that made them human before erasing them completely. But the fourth would be different. The fourth would be Mason Tate, the one that didn't go as planned, the mistake that led to his capture. By late 2011, Mason Tate was like so many others in Hollywood, chasing a dream that never seemed to get any closer. He worked at a high-end restaurant, spending his nights serving food to the very people he wanted to be. He smiled, made connections, accepted empty promises from producers who would never remember his name. And when the shifts ended, he went to Leo Carver's mansion, drinking beside people who would one day walk red carpets while he still waited tables. Leo Carver didn't know Mason well, but he knew the type. The young, ambitious, reckless kind. The ones who said yes to everything, who stayed too long at the party, who didn't always know when to leave. Mason had been coming to his house for months, blending into the background of expensive suits and glittering dresses. He was loud, confident, always trying to prove that he belonged. He never realized he was being watched. Elliot had noticed him for the first time in December 2011. It hadn't been intentional. He had never targeted someone so close before, but Mason had been impossible to ignore. He had seen him stumble down the sidewalk at night, drunk and laughing, oblivious to the danger just a few feet away. He had seen the way Mason's life was so unstructured, so chaotic, how easy it would be for someone like him to disappear. And for the first time, Elliot had been impulsive. He had started following Mason in small, insignificant ways. He sat near him at a coffee shop, listening to the way he talked. He learned where he worked, what time he finished his shifts. He memorized the way he walked, the way he checked his phone obsessively, always waiting for the call that never came. He wasn't careful like the others. He wasn't protected by routines or stability. He was vulnerable. And on the night of March 6th, 2012, he was drunk. The party at Leo Carver's house had gone on until the early morning, guests spilling onto the street in a blur of music and flashing lights. Mason had been among them, stumbling toward the sidewalk, his laughter echoing into the night. He had tried to call for a ride, but his phone was dead. He had started walking, his steps uneven, his thoughts clouded by the alcohol in his veins. He never even noticed when he stepped onto the wrong property. It happened fast, too fast. There were no carefully laid plans this time, no months of waiting. Elliot had seen him from the window, watched as Mason leaned against the fence, trying to steady himself. He could have let him go. He could have turned off the light and gone back inside, but he didn't. By the time March 7th, 2012 arrived, Mason Tate was gone. And this time, Elliot hadn't covered his tracks as well as he thought. Blood had been found in the alleyway that separated the two properties. A single drop, barely noticeable against the pavement, but it was enough. Enough to start the investigation that would unravel everything. Enough to end the illusion of safety that had kept Elliot hidden for so long. The disappearance of Mason Tate had started as a missing persons case, the kind that Hollywood police saw too often. Young, reckless men who partied too hard, got caught up with the wrong people, and vanished without warning. But by March 8, 2012, it had already become something much more. Detective Riley Sloan had spent over a decade working homicide, and she knew the difference between an accident and something darker. Mason wasn't the kind of man who would disappear quietly. He wanted attention, craved it, and if he had run off somewhere, he would have made sure someone noticed. She had spent most of the afternoon combing through the guest list from Leo Carver's party. The names blurred together, actors, producers, socialites, and models, all blending into the same shallow world. None of them had seen anything. They remembered Mason being drunk, laughing, stumbling toward the street, but after that, nothing. The frustration built quickly. The case had no direction, no answers. Mason had simply vanished. But then came the blood. It was a single drop. Tiny, almost insignificant. A speck on the pavement in the alley that separated Leo Carver's mansion from his neighbor's property. If the forensic team hadn't been so thorough, it might have been missed entirely. But there it was, dried, barely visible, but enough to change the course of the investigation. The results came back fast. It was Mason's. That was when Elliot Grayson's name appeared in the case file for the second time. Riley remembered him from her initial round of questioning. He had been polite, careful with his words, but there was something in his silence that unsettled her. He had been too helpful, too willing to cooperate. People like him weren't usually guilty. They were the ones who called in anonymous tips, the ones who avoided even the slightest connection to crime. But Mason had bled near his home, and that was reason enough to keep looking. By March 12, 2012, LAPD brought in cadaver dogs to search the area. The first one reacted immediately, stopping at the edge of Elliot's backyard, its body stiff, nose pressed to the ground. The second did the same, and then the third. It was the strongest reaction Riley had ever seen. The officers stood in tense silence as the dogs moved back and forth, circling the property, their movements frantic. There was something there, something buried. But it wasn't enough. Without a warrant, there was nothing they could do. Elliot had refused to let them search. His demeanor had changed slightly, his polite responses now sharpened at the edges. He wasn't nervous, at least not in the way most suspects were. There was no sweating, no shaking hands, no sudden change in tone, just a quiet resistance. And then, as if the city itself had decided it was time, the fires came. March 17, 2012. The wind had been strong that day, dry and unforgiving. The kind of wind that turned a small spark into an unstoppable force. The fire started deep in the canyons, and within hours, it spread toward the homes that lined the Hollywood Hills. Elliot was forced to evacuate. By March 18, 2012, his property was surrounded by firefighters. They worked tirelessly, trying to contain the damage, moving quickly through yards, checking for hot spots. And then, by sheer chance, they found the bones. They were barely visible at first, blackened, half buried in the scorched earth behind his backyard. But as the firefighters dug deeper, the truth revealed itself. The bones weren't from one person. They weren't fresh. Some had been there for years. By March 19, 2012, there was no hesitation. Riley secured a search warrant, and for the first time, Elliot Grayson's home was opened up to the world. And what they found inside was worse than anything they had imagined. The house itself was sterile, untouched, almost artificial. There were no family photos, no personal decorations, just clean surfaces, neatly arranged furniture, and a silence that stretched through every room. But then they found the basement door. It was locked. Dead-bolted from the inside. It took nearly 10 minutes to get it open, the sound of metal grinding against metal as officers forced their way through. The air that escaped was thick, damp, carrying a faint scent of something sickly sweet. When they stepped inside, the first thing they saw was the surgical table. It sat in the center of the room, cold and metallic, its surface stained with something dark that had seeped deep into the grooves. A drain had been installed beneath it, leading into an elaborate system of pipes. Someone had gone through great effort to ensure that whatever happened in this room stayed here. Then there were the souvenirs. Shelves lined the walls, each one holding tiny relics from the lives Elliot had taken. Lockets, teeth, earrings, small fragments of clothing. Some still carried traces of dried blood. Others looked almost untouched, as if they had been placed there with care, preserved like memories. A notebook was found near the desk. Pages and pages of handwritten notes, each one detailing a different murder. Dates, methods, observations, written clinically, almost like a scientist documenting an experiment. But it was the video camera that changed everything. They had expected trophies. They had expected confession notes. But the footage was something else entirely. Hours of recordings, each one showing Elliot at work. The victims strapped to the table, their bodies still, their faces frozen in terror. The precision of each cut, the way he moved with calm expertise. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pleasure, it was control. By March 20th, 2012, Elliot Grayson was arrested without bail. The media wasted no time giving him a name, the Hollywood Hills surgeon. And just like that, the man who had lived unnoticed for years was finally seen for what he really was. The trial of Elliot Grayson began in October 2013, and by then, he was no longer just a name in a police report. He was a legend of horror, a man whose crimes had shaken Hollywood to its core. Cameras flashed every time he entered the courtroom, his face expressionless, his posture rigid. He showed no remorse, no regret. To him, it was all a misunderstanding. His defense team argued insanity, claiming that his actions had been scientific rather than violent. He had not killed out of pleasure, they said, but out of curiosity. A need to understand the human body in ways that others never could. The recordings found in his basement were not trophies, but research. The souvenirs were artifacts, pieces of something greater than himself. But Detective Riley Sloan knew the truth. She had spent months piecing together the evidence, reading his notes, watching the videos, things that would never leave her mind. She stood before the jury, her voice steady, her words sharp, ensuring he never walked free again. She spoke of the victims, of the way they had suffered, of the precision in which their lives had been taken. Elliot had not been a man overcome by madness. He had been fully aware, fully in control, and that made him even more dangerous. The verdict was reached in March 2014. Life without parole, no possibility of appeal, no second chances. The courtroom was silent when it was read, but Leo Carver felt the weight of it like a crushing blow. He had lived next door to a monster. He had thrown parties while Mason Tate bled out just a few feet away. He had laughed, drank, celebrated, never knowing that behind the closed doors of that dark, silent house, something unspeakable had been happening. He couldn't stay. He couldn't look at that property without seeing the truth. Within the week, he sold the mansion and left Hollywood Hills forever. By 2015, Elliot Grayson was locked away in San Quentin prison, his days reduced to empty hours and concrete walls. He rarely spoke. He rarely moved. He sat in his cell, listening to the distant sounds of men who still had hope. A guard passed by, mentioning the wildfires approaching the prison, the dry winds carrying the scent of burning wood and scorched earth. Elliot barely reacted until a faint smirk flickered across his lips. The last thing he ever said was a whisper, a thought spoken into the air. Fire always reveals the truth. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and you can check out another insane case we have. The case where a male pizza restaurant owner murders his female manager to hide a secret affair. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comments section.